Welcome to the Her Story Circle podcast, the podcast that brings you the extraordinary tales of everyday women who are changing the world. I'm your host, Gertrude Mache, and I'd like to acknowledge traditional custodians of the land on which we meet today. I also like to pay my respects to elders, past, present, and emerging. Every week, we dive into the lives, challenges, and triumphs of women from all four corners of the globe. We're here to inspire, enlighten, and connect, sharing stories that uplift and empower. So grab a cup of coffee, settle in, and join us as we explore the incredible journeys of women shaping our future. This is Her Story, where every woman's voice matters. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Her Story Circle. This is Gertrude Mache here in beautiful Melbourne, Australia. And today I am graced with the presence of yet another intriguing young woman. Welcome, welcome, welcome to our tribe. Please tell everybody your full name, where you're based, and share your story with us today.
Hi there. It's such a pleasure to be here chatting with you. My name is Christine or Christy Gibson. I definitely go by both, which I think is part of my story. I'm based in Calgary, Canada. So that's the western part near the Rocky Mountains. But I definitely see myself as a global person, which you will probably hear through the story. And because of what I've already shared with Gertrude, I'll probably start with an earthquake. I had been volunteering in Nepal in 2015. Even as I start saying it, I can hear there's a shakiness in my voice still. And it's interesting because working in Nepal, which I'd been doing for a long time, I first worked there as a resident, like family medicine resident when I was 26 years old. And then I went back about 15 years later and I'd been volunteering annually. And everyone talked about earthquakes. Everyone said, well, when the big one hits. And I remember having a conversation at this beautiful French restaurant. I lived in a town called Patton, which is in the Kathmandu Valley. So there's three major cities there, Kathmandu, Bhaktapur, and Patton. And I was volunteering at the Patton Medical School, helping them develop family medicine residency and learning so much. I mean, they had this social accountability mandate with community-based education that every single medical school should emulate. So it's really a learning and teaching journey for me, despite being a physician with a lot of credentials. So I'm sitting in this French restaurant, and I remember clearly the proprietor, the owner, the inspiration of this place said, well, I'm not really excited about this hotel being built because they're putting a pool on the second floor. And I thought, well, what does that matter? Maybe they're overlooking your diners. And she said, well, when the earthquake hits, that pool's going to collapse and fall into the courtyard and wreck all of our establishments. And it was the first time that somebody had said when the earthquake hits. And it really hit me hard when that happened. And that was the visit. So I had been going to Nepal for probably 5 years in a row at that point when the earthquake hit. So it was a Saturday around 2 p.m, and it was a festival day. So people were outside celebrating. Thank goodness. There was a parade through the center of Patton. Doctors don't get a day off. They sometimes get Sundays off, but rarely. So most of my colleagues were in the hospital, and I was working away on my laptop. I rent an apartment in Patton, lovely place. So I had this like really kind of Japanese style kitchen table where it's only like a foot off the ground, which will matter in a minute. So it starts with this like really low rumbling, and I remember like hearing some chattering of the dishware because my dishware was all on shelves that were wall mounted. Horrible aesthetic decision for Nepal. And then it just it got to the point where things were bouncing. And I remember thinking, oh my gosh, this is it. This is the earthquake that happens once in 80 years, and I'm here. And I had a 10-liter jug of water, and it threw itself off the counter. And I remember hearing that thud and recognizing that there was no way I could fit under that table. So I had this instinct, like, get under something, get around something, have something to protect me. But I knew that because of the way my table was shaped, I couldn't get under it. So I looked around the room. There was nothing I could kind of safely bar myself through. I've heard about doorways, but it didn't seem really safe. Like, I'm wider than a doorway. So I ran down the stairs, and the stairs were kind of like fluid. They were moving. And it's funny because, like, I know in actuality, this all took place in about a minute. But when I think back on the memory, luckily I'm no longer triggered by it, but there is an intensity to it. So I can recall every single sensation in my body and like the things that I was able to attend to, which isn't a lot. But I remember thinking, like, the stairs aren't solid anymore, and grabbing the handrail to try to work myself down. They were curved. And on the main floor, I opened the doors and thought, okay, I'm going to go outside in the courtyard. I'll be outside. That'll be better. But some of the buildings in Patton, because it's kind of an older center, certainly I was living in Old Patton, the buildings had come down, and they were like raining bricks, and like crumbled cement and plaster was filling the courtyard like water, like a river. And it was totally not safe to be inside. So I closed the doors. Luckily, they closed, because you can imagine that in an earthquake, everything is shifting. They were really heavy. They felt solid. And I was like, okay, I'm solid in here. The building hasn't come down yet. So I dove under a table that was on the main floor of the home, and it was shaking. So like the table was jumping, huge wooden table. And I grabbed onto the legs. That's the opening of my first TED Talk, because what I learned was a couple of things. One was community has the answer. As a physician and an educator who's super credentialed, my job was to get evacuated and let the experts that were community led do the work. And the people at the Patton Hospital that I was working had a triage plan. They spoke the language. They understood how to do surgery and minor procedures that I had no idea as a primary care doc in Canada. And then when I got evacuated, it was about 4 days later, 30 aftershocks. Some were pretty major. I landed in Singapore, and I got a hotel room in a really tall building. Didn't really think anything of it. But every single time the garage door went up and down, my body reacted in the most like intense way. It wasn't a full-blown panic attack. I'd had those when I was younger. It wasn't that, but there was like this sense of anxiety and like, oh my gosh, what's happening? And it was like the princess and the pea, where I could really experience that earthquake. So I went to meet a psychiatrist, and he said to me, you're having a normal response to an abnormal situation, and you don't meet PTSD criteria yet, because it was too early. And it just didn't make sense that I would be diagnosed in that way. But he's like, keep an eye on things. You're having symptoms. And so I went home and diligently looked everything up, as physicians do, because we're constantly learning. And I mean, I'd learned about PTSD in medical school and residency, but it wasn't something that I really identified a lot unless you'd survived a natural disaster. And what I learned is, in my practice back home, so many people were facing it. And that started off as a hospital practice. And then it was matching my community care practice. And I thought, wow, like, this is amazing. And I jumped into learning more about what I could do about trauma. And as a family doctor, you're not really supposed to do that. But I thought, I have so many folks who've gone through trauma, and nobody is really managing it for them. So what could I do? And I took a 3-day workshop. I mean, this is so sad, because this is where I started. And I jumped in to do an eye movement treatment called accelerated resolution therapy with my family practice patients. And it was the most revolutionary thing I could have done. Not only did their psychological health improve, but their physical health improved. Diabetes, blood pressure, asthma, like, you name it, their health improved. Like, I mean, I've got lots of stories, but this isn't meant to be clinical. And I just thought, I'm doing the wrong thing. Like, I need to move further upstream at the root causes of what's causing ill health. And I'd already been working in refugee health because I did a lot of global health work. I actually ran our global health residency. And at that point, I was like, this is the thing that I need to do. So I got on social media to talk about it. I've written a book about it. And it's just changed my sense of purpose. I recognize it in so many things, like from our response to climate and COVID, to so much that's happening in my own body that I just never knew, and it helps me control my own stress.
Wow. You have been through so much. I haven't met anybody who survived an earthquake. I mean, that must have been an experience of a lifetime. And I'm happy you're here to tell that story. So tell us, what did you begin noticing in your patients and in yourself that led to this shift?
I mean, a lot of this stuff wasn't in the formal textbooks that I had been told to read. I had to like go outside the box. So for 3 years, I just studied everything I could find about trauma. And there were two things. Is like we'd been told that like if you go through an event, like a war or a natural disaster, that's what causes trauma.
Mhm.
But the more that I learned, the more that I recognized that so much trauma happens relationally in childhood. And the very same year that I graduated from medical school, there was this huge study done in California showing that the more things you go through as a kid, the worse your health is as an adult. And that's physical health, psychological health, and social health too. Like things like early pregnancy and divorce and, just general unhappiness. And I thought, I don't know anything else that correlates so evenly. And then I thought back on traumatic things that had happened to me, like from medical training, which is horrifying, my job at the hospital, where you kind of like somebody is really sick or dies, and you have to compartmentalize that and move to the next person. Like I hadn't processed a lot of my trauma, a significant divorce, and then more recently some deaths. So there was just a lot that I hadn't unpacked, and then I recognized in my patients that definitely the complex childhood stuff, nobody had given them a chance to unpack.
Wow, that is fascinating. Now, can you explain the connection between trauma and substance use in lay terms?
Definitely. One of the places where I work as a trauma therapist is an adult addiction clinic. And the way that I frame it, this is kind of, Gabor Mate was one of my early teachers.
Okay.
We both use the same framework for this, which is it's a solution to a problem that hasn't had another solution yet. So what I've since learned is I've studied the alphabet soup of trauma therapies. And for me, it makes sense that you've found a substance. And sometimes it's not even like alcohol or drugs. Sometimes it's social media. Sometimes
Yeah.
it's online shopping. Like addiction is a very general thing. Porn, gambling. There's so many ways to be addicted and distracted and help numb the pain that you're in. So what this addiction is doing is it's solving something for you, generally helping with the emotional pain you would otherwise be experiencing. And so my mission is to get the skills to help resolve emotional pain into people's hands, because there are so many other ways to do it. And at the addiction clinic, I always say, like, it's so easy to continue using this substance or finding other ways to obsessively distract unless someone's given you a different kind of solution.
Mm-hmm. Wow, that's fascinating. So what is brain spotting and how does it differ from other traditional therapies?
I've learned so many different therapies, and some of the ones that I love the most use the body. So what I hadn't understood with my experience in Nepal, the way that I described the floor moving and the feeling of grabbing those table legs and like the auditory impact of the raining concrete into the bricks and the dust into the courtyard.
Wow.
those were fixed sensory experiences, and trauma is trapped in the body. So it's not just something that you can think your way out of. You actually have to process the emotions and physical sensations that happened at the time. And it's easy
Mhm.
to make that make sense when you think of an earthquake, but people don't understand that that's very much true for childhood stuff too. If you're getting messages constantly that you're not good enough or that the world isn't safe, those messages also get trapped in the body. So I'm a huge fan of what we call somatic therapies, which is body-based or psychosensory therapy. So brain
Mhm.
spotting is one that uses vision. And the idea is that where you look affects how you feel, and that these traumatic impacts actually get stuck in our visual field. And if we look in a certain direction, we can access the memory directly. It's one of many different tools that I use. That one's not something I can teach folks. So like I joined TikTok and I love to teach people things like self acupressure and gentle touch. Brain spotting is a little bit difficult to teach people how to process, but there are some skills within brain spotting that people can learn. So in my most recent TED talk about climate psychology, I talk about looking far away and then looking near. And what you're doing is you're pendulating between your active and your calm nervous system states. And that's really regulating for folks. So, like, some people need to grab a beer and unwind at the end of the day. But what if you could just use your vision, pendulate between near and far? So, like, look at the far wall, look at your finger, look at the far wall, take a couple breaths, look at your finger, take a couple breaths. That is really, really regulating. And the more that we help share these super easy skills, the more
Mm.
people won't have to turn to things like substances, and the better their physical health will be too.
So how have you seen brain spotting help with addiction or disassociation in surprising ways?
You know, it's amazing that you're asking this question from Australia, Gertrude, because the person who created the brain spotting protocol for addiction, Roby Abelus, she actually lives in Australia. So she calls it the crocodile method because crocodiles are something that she has exposure to. But here, I kind of
Oh,
renamed it the black bear method because that's way more familiar to us in Western Canada. Um, her protocol is super cool. What she has you do is you find the place in your brain that's linked to the craving of the substance. And then you
mhm.
find the gaze related to that feeling. So it's really about physical sensations. And then you
Right.
find a second place in your brain and your gaze related to the consequences. So you find the craving and the consequences. And I'll use that word pendulate again, but it basically means you go back and forth. So you create a brain-based connection. We call this neuroplasticity when you're rewiring your brain. You create
Yes.
a new connection between the craving and the consequence. And then that is a formal link in your brain that every time the craving comes up, your brain says, "Oh, consequence." So what I love about neuroplasticity is there's no age limit to it. Anybody can rewire their brain and create these new connections that are more desired, like things that you'd rather be doing or goals that you have. And so a lot of what I do is help people figure out what those objectives are. Like, I'm not really creating an agenda of how they would want to feel or what they would prefer. I'm helping them figure that out. So part of it is processing things like triggers and uncomfortable sensations and distress. And then part of it is like, well, if you're not driven by trauma reflexes anymore, who do you want to be and what do you want to become? And oh, it's beautiful. I love it. And that's why
Mm.
I'm on TikTok. It's why I wrote the Modern Trauma Toolkit, is to get these skills into people's hands.
That is just fantastic. Absolutely fascinating. Now, in all of this, what does it mean to treat trauma as at a neurobiological level?
Another really good question, Gertrude. A lot of medical students, and I think this is true of lots of people who do therapy, we're kind of taught that CBT or cognitive behavior therapy is the gold standard and it fixes everything. And it definitely has its place. And yet, when you're
Mhm.
thinking about trauma, there's nothing wrong with your thought patterns. Like when your thoughts are telling you, hey, you should avoid this, or this could be scary, or what if something bad happens? That's
Mm-hmm.
actually the way that your brain is protecting you. And
Yeah.
so when I think back to being in Singapore and that garage door opening and my body goes into this like really intense response, that was my brain reminding me, oh, hey, last time that you've had this feeling of shakiness, you were in an earthquake. Is this an earthquake? And so here's me Googling, is Singapore on a fault line? Our brains are adaptive, and what they're
Yeah.
designed to do is to protect us. And so what we have to do is to retrain the brain. Hey, what if I'm safe right now? And that happens through
Yeah.
the nervous system. You can't think your way through it. So when the basis of CBT is like, oh, there's something disordered with your brain and there's something wrong about those thoughts. And I do the opposite. I'm like, no, there's something really right about those thoughts. But how might you want that to be different so you're not constantly avoiding or activated? What do you prefer?
Wow. Absolutely incredible stuff. Now, many people don't realize that they've experienced trauma. How do you help them to identify it?
I mean, there is the psychiatry textbook of PTSD, and the four major criteria are really what we've been talking about. Chapter 2 of the Modern Trauma Toolkit goes into a lot more detail, but it's basically avoiding, so things that might create that activity, fight and flight feeling. People tend to avoid that, avoiding your triggers.
Mm-hmm.
Hypervigilance, and that basically means you startle easily, you're worried, you're waiting for that shoe to drop.
Yes.
Intrusive symptoms like flashbacks or nightmares, and I was lucky I never had that related to the earthquake, so I never did meet the full criteria. And then the last one is kind of a change in the way that you believe, like the way that you believe your place in the world. Like, I'm alone facing this, or I'm not safe, or there's something wrong with me, bad things happen. Like the way that you think about yourself and the world tends to shift in PTSD. So there's time-based criteria and it has to affect your functioning in certain ways. But I don't want to really get into that because more interesting to me is what we miss around complex trauma. So there's a
Wow.
lot of trauma that's caused by doctors. I had no idea how much trauma we cause by being fat phobic, by not getting good consent from procedures, by being racist. Racism and fat phobia and LGBTQ based violence, gender based violence, poverty, all of these things are traumatic. Bullying is traumatic. Sometimes being on your social media feed and watching really devastating things happen to somebody else, that can cause trauma. And there's just so much that's happening that we tend to ignore. Ancestral trauma. So the epigenetics is the way that we inherit trauma through our ancestral lineage. So if one
Mm.
person goes through an event or has a difficult childhood, it actually changes their genetic code. And this was not something that I learned in medical school. So when I really think about broader traumas, complex or developmental trauma that happens in childhood is not
Yeah.
something that we're very good at diagnosing. And all of these other social traumas, nevertheless, ones that we cause, are totally undertreated, underrecognized. So
Mm.
my goal is to help people really understand more about trauma, because as much as people keep saying, well, we're overusing the word, we're still under recognizing it and we're not getting the skills into the right hands. And I don't mean just doctors, I mean parents and teachers and anyone who works with the public needs to be able
Yeah.
to recognize when somebody's in either fight and flight or freeze and collapse, and have some
Mhm.
understanding of what to do. And some of that's just regulating yourself. I didn't know how to regulate myself. I would run around the hospital being totally activated all the time. My pager would go off and my heart rate would go off.
Oh, man. That's on a daily basis. That's just
Absolutely.
crazy. Well, what inspired you to begin sharing mental health content on TikTok?
There was a young person in my life. Her name is Ashwarya. She's just somebody very close to me. She started off as being my mentee, and now she's pretty much my mentor too. And she said to
Mhm.
me, the way that you explain mental health, you're really good at breaking it down to basic content, like to help me understand things that I didn't understand before. And then she said, if you join TikTok, people would be really interested in learning more about their mental health. And I thought,
Yes.
I want to share the skills that I've learned. Like, how can you just really gently brush the palm of your hand and imagine that you're on a beach and regulate your nervous system? Or how could
Yeah.
you use breath, or like you talked about, gaze, like the direction that your eyes move? These are
Yes.
all skills that I can share. But I also wanted to say, like, how are we also complicit? Like, what does it mean to actually take on the challenge of climate and focus on the trauma that's happening in every environment? I mean, you're in Australia and I'm in Western Canada. There's smoke and fires constantly in the summertime. It's almost a whole new season. How are we actively addressing that? That's not really in those fear-based responses.
Yeah.
There's these system level traumas that I think we all really need to address too. So I wanted to talk about trauma in the body, but how does trauma happen in communities? I work at the refugee clinic. Every single person there has faced trauma.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and then the way that the kids are facing it too, it's different because they're trying to grow up in such a different environment than where they were, whether it was a camp or a different country. So I think about those traumas in community, other
Mm.
communities that are equity denied. And then I think about these greater systems, like this whole planet that's really having a lot of trauma right now. And that's really what I talk about, is like these 3 levels of systems.
Wow. So, how can we vet online mental health advice and avoid harm?
Such a good question. I did an article. I'm trying to think of who it was for. I remember Taylor Lorenz was the interviewer.
Mm.
But I've done a few articles on this very question. Luckily, there's actually one really quick answer, which is the WHO has created an organization of trusted medical professionals or health-based professionals in social media. They call it FIDES,
Yeah.
or FIDES. And so if you're a FIDES-based professional, you're somebody that they trust. So I'm in that organization, which is really helpful. And we kind of do some joint collabs at times. I think a lot of it is just knowing the background of the person. I mean, there are a lot of physicians and nurses who aren't giving fact-based health data, but most of us do.
Yes.
So like, have they studied this? Like, have they studied it in any facet, whether it's public health or epidemiology or different kinds of healthcare? And I'm a huge fan of like lifestyle medicine and integrated medicine. So I'm not saying everyone has to go to medical school and that's the only way that they can be trusted. There's so
Right.
many people that have trained in ancestral ways of knowing. So I studied Ayurvedic medicine and Qigong. So that's the health-based aspects of Tai Chi. I mean, there are
Yes.
10,000-year-old practices in India and Africa and Asia that we have totally forgotten. And this is what they still rely on. I think you mentioned you were from Zimbabwe. I remember meeting
Yes.
a traditional healer there. And this is the person that the whole village goes to. So one of the things that they had done in primary care was they taught her how to recognize tuberculosis. And then she would help the villagers self-refer to the TB unit. I mean, we all have a
Mhm.
part to play. And I'm really excited that social media is one of the ways that we can amplify voices that are otherwise not being heard, and amplify
Yes.
real good knowledge to get it into people's hands, whether it's psychological or physical health.
I love it. Wow. This is awesome. Now, let's finish off our interview with how do you address withdrawal symptoms in patients who didn't even realize that they were dependent on any substance?
Mm, it's an interesting question. When I did have a family practice, I had a lot of folks who were experiencing substance use in different stages.
Mhm.
And so it's really dependent on the substance. So every single thing, whether it's a sedative or an opioid or alcohol has a totally different withdrawal, what's the right word? Cluster of symptoms, I guess. So it really depends on what the substance of choice is. Um,
Right.
what withdrawal signifies is that your body has gotten used to it. So if there's anything that you've been doing in a regular way, and substances are probably most likely to cause this, and then you really, really quickly stop it, your body, when it's been used to that level of engagement with the substance, will say, hey, where did that go? And that's kind of where the withdrawal symptoms come from. Um,
Okay.
some of the most significant I've seen are from alcohol. So it's really, really important when you're using large amounts of alcohol to taper through an addiction program, because going cold turkey can cause something called delirium tremens,
Right.
seizures, people even die from it. So a lot of folks think that navigating substances is something they can do on their own. And this is
Yeah.
one place where I really recommend going with a trusted professional.
Yeah. You need to find the right help.
Yeah.
Wow. Thank you so much for coming online and sharing your story with our community today. Absolutely fascinating what you've done with your medical knowledge and now looking at alternative ways to help people. It's so comprehensive and rich and needed right now in the world. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. I love that you're highlighting these stories.
Thank you. Thank you. And thank you to everybody who tuned in today. The Her Story Circle is not just a podcast. We're a social impact movement that brings you the stories and voices of people from all over the world. We share our stories to uplift you, to inspire you, to energize you, but most importantly, to help take you from where you are now to where you're trying to go. So if you know someone who is needing help, doesn't even realize that they are or have experienced trauma at some point in their lives, we've got a professional right here who can help you and guide you and make sure that you get the right help. So please reach out. Don't try and do it alone. I'll be back again tomorrow, everybody, with yet another amazing guest. In the meantime, have a fantastic day, morning, or evening, wherever you are in the world. And Christine, thanks again for the interview.
Thank you, Gertrude. You just explained perfectly what post-traumatic growth looks like. So you embody it, you explain it. Thank you.
Fantastic. Bye for now, everybody. Thank you for tuning into the Her Story Circle podcast. I hope today's story has inspired you to believe in the power of our stories and the difference you can make in the world when you use your voice. I'm Gertrude Mache, and it's been an honor to share this space with you, where voices from all walks of life come together to weave a rich tapestry of diverse perspectives. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review our podcast to help us share these stories with more listeners. Follow us on social media by looking for the Her Story Circle podcast for more updates. And join us tomorrow for another episode filled with courage, resilience, and empowerment. Remember, your story matters, and together we're building a stronger, more inclusive world. Until next time, keep making her story. Thank you so much.